This is the last chapter of the childhood tales of Jesus. The Essenes taught him to be humble and simple in his teaching. To accomplish this, he needed to always feel calm. Their teachings were some of the most influential in his life as far as his well-being was concerned. They taught him internal fortitude, which stood him in good stead in the trials of his life. Chapter 7. Starting his mission. Once, when sleeping outside with some of his friends, Jesus slipped away from them and went among the date trees to be alone and pray. His friends went looking for him, and when they saw what he was doing, they ridiculed him and laughed at him. With the tears streaming down his face and feeling shame and embarrassment, he quietly slipped away and went home. At home, after thinking about the incident for several hours and berating himself for reacting this way, he got up and dressed and returned to the place where his friends were sleeping. He woke them up and made a huge campfire and set them all in a circle around the fire and proceeded to lecture them for an hour. This was probably his first sermon, so to speak. In essence, he told them that the Creator was always there to talk to, but that he was inside of each of them and they merely had to talk to themselves, so to speak. He told them he could do this better when alone and without any distractions, but that it could be done when among others. He told them that the kingdom of God was within, that they wouldn't find him in the temples when they went with their parents if they couldn't find him inside all the time. He said, if the cask of wine is empty sitting in your house, it will not be filled simply by carrying it to the temple. You have to fill your own cask of wine all by yourself. You have to find what you really and truly believe in, what is the truth for you, and fill your cask with this, and nourish it and replenish it every day yourself, not taking the cask to the temple once a week to be filled by someone else. He urged all his friends to try this, and with a sigh he extinguished the fire and let them go back to sleep. This took place when he was about 14. He was slightly built, but tall as a young man, with reddish gold hair and blue eyes. He had a few freckles on his face and arms due to exposure to the sun. He also liked to sing. This has never been brought out before, but he had a pleasing, clear voice, and for a while he toured neighboring towns singing, much like a minstrel or balladeer. His songs always had messages interwoven in them. This was actually the real start of his ministry, this singing. After a while he would stop singing and talk to those who had gathered around. He played a simple instrument similar to a lute or guitar. He would lay this aside and start explaining the meaning of a song he had sung, which he had composed. Sometimes he made them up on the spot. The groups following him gradually grew larger and larger, and as his name became known, he eventually gave up the singing, as the people were so full of questions to be answered, and he felt that he could accomplish more by talking. He eventually did not carry his instrument with him at all. This was taking place when he was 16, 17, and 18. The city of Jerusalem was never his home. He lived outside its gates. It was a walled city at that time, and the gates were locked and guarded each night. He did most of his strolling musician ministry inside the city walls, but was always sure to leave by sundown. He made up a song one day about 2 rabbits. One day a small rabbit sat behind a bush. His friend came running by. The first rabbit's tail was sticking out from the bush, and his friend stepped on it as he went loping along. The first rabbit felt as if he'd been treated very badly and that it was done deliberately. The second rabbit insisted it was an accident and said he didn't know the first rabbit was even behind the bush because the tail looked just like another stone, and he certainly hadn't done it on purpose. The friendship was very strained after that, until one day rabbit number 2 decided to reenact the incident with the use of a third rabbit to prove to the first rabbit that the tail really did look like a stone. At the crucial moment when the first rabbit was running by, the third rabbit moved his tail and the first rabbit accidentally stepped on it. This went on through several verses until finally Jesus would lay his instrument down and start talking to the children about how very foolish it was to keep on harping over an incident as unimportant as that, because the more you tried to correct it and prove yourself innocent, the larger the whole episode was growing, and the more people were getting involved and more feelings were getting hurt. If it kept growing long enough, this one little incident could lead to a full-scale war. How much simpler to accept an apology to start with and drop the whole thing and not dwell on it. Most of the time, 99% of the time, it probably was just an accident, a careless accident, but an accident nonetheless. One parable used by Jesus when teaching was as follows. A merchant selling wares came through the village with a cart loaded with goods. He would stop at each house and also in places where several were gathered talking, such as at the well. While stopped in such a crowd, a beggar, who had been hiding under a mat in the cart, jumped out and ran, taking with him a valuable vase that the merchant had planned to sell for a goodly sum. In fact, he had depended on the sale of that vase to make this particular trip to this town profitable. When he saw the beggar jump off and run with the vase, he started shouting and ran after him, waving his arms. The beggar tripped over a stump and dropped the vase, which smashed into pieces. The merchant sat down on the stump and started crying. Jesus had watched this entire scene take place and approached the merchant and consoled him with the fact that he still had all the goods left in his cart. When the merchant returned to the cart, which he had left unattended while chasing the beggar with the vase, he found that it had been ransacked and most everything else of value had been stolen. He realized that this trip through was not going to be very profitable, but had learned a valuable lesson and vowed not to leave his cart unattended again. The next trip through town he stopped at the same spot and caught a glimpse of the beggar who had stolen the vase last time. He became angry all over again and immediately began to chase the beggar. This time he tripped and fell and injured his leg very badly and also broke his arm. By the time he could drag himself back to the cart, it had again been ransacked, and now he was in pain and in no shape to continue his trip. He spent the night in the cart and vowed not to return to that town again. But it was on the route to a much larger town which he wanted to go to, so he had to travel through it, and the people always wanted him to stop. He decided to stop once more, wondering what could possibly happen this time, and stayed alert to every possibility. The beggar showed up, walked right up to the merchant's cart, and told the man how bad he felt for the inconvenience he had caused the merchant on the other trip through and wanted to make amends. He offered to travel with him to the larger town and help in any way he could. The two became hard and fast friends. A relationship was formed that worked well for both the rest of their days. They prospered and were happy. Another parable Jesus used was as follows. There was a tree with twisted bark near the road to Bethany. The tree had strong limbs and heavy foliage and was used as a comfortable resting place for the travelers on the road. This tree became diseased, and the limbs started falling off, and it lost all its leaves. One day, during a thunderstorm, there was a group of people taking shelter under the tree when a gust of wind blew the tree over. Many were injured, several killed. It was a large tree and did much damage to the possessions of the travelers, and also blocked the road, so they could no longer proceed on their way even if they were able to. People in Bethany who were expecting them came looking for them and were shocked to find the tragedy that had happened. They took the dead and injured back into town, and the rest of them stayed and cleared the tree off the road so passage was again possible. The wood from the tree was stacked along the road and soon disappeared as people passing by would take one or two pieces to use for their own ventures. Future travelers on the road no longer would have the beautiful old tree to take shelter and comfort from. They wouldn't even have a log pile to provide shade in the noontime heat, so most no longer paused there to rest, and the huge tree was soon forgotten by all, even by those who took the pieces. But it was never forgotten by those who had been injured or who had lost a loved one due to the demise of the tree. It eventually turned out that the tree was never remembered for the good it had done while alive to shelter and protect others, but only remembered for the harm and hurt it had caused in its final moments.